I'm Chris Farrell, and this is On Watch. Thanks for joining us, everybody. It's good to be with you, give you a little update on what's been going on here at Judicial Watch, and perhaps more importantly, what's been going on over on the Hill with respect to Congressman Devin Nunes and the House Intelligence Committee's investigation of the so-called Trump-Russia collusion investigation. Obviously, Special Counsel Mueller has yet to really prove anything other than Paul Manafort spends a lot on suits, and if you're interviewed by a special agent of the FBI for more than 2 hours, in the case of General Flynn, you can be charged with violating 18 U.S.C. 1001, false official statements. And I say that sarcastically because that's exactly what can happen. If I interviewed any of you for more than 2 hours and I really wanted to come up with a way to charge you with something, certainly, in one instance you use the word of, and then the next instance, an hour and a half later you describe something and say it was from something. We can drill down and parse your language to come up with something to charge somebody with false official statements or misstatements. And so Mueller hasn't done very much. Devin Nunes and the Intelligence Committee did do some things. I think what's most interesting is you haven't heard a peep about unmasking in the last few months. But nonetheless, when it comes to Trump and the collusions and the Russians and all that nonsense, it really has amounted to a lot of nothing. No one's been able to articulate what the criminal predicate is of the investigation. They've interviewed a bunch of people on different topics. And in this case, you now see some media reports that Adam Schiff, the minority leader, and some of his staff may issue what they call a minority report, meaning a separate report that's sort of either a rebuttal or an alternative view on what the majority will report when the committee's done with its work. So what this really is a sort of an orchestrated, controlled leak. Democratic staffers working for Adam Schiff run around whispering to various reporters saying, hey, we had to change or we had modifications to subpoenas that we issued for various government officials. And so we added some, subtracted some, rearranged the order of who was going to appear. And in some cases, we decided not to interview people. Well, you know what? Here's the dirty little secret on Capitol Hill. That happens in every committee of Congress every day of the week. When they bring in witnesses or they have people testify, that sort of decision of who goes when, which people are we going to interview, which people are we not going to interview, which government officials testified before a different committee of Congress, and we're going to take their statement as being the answer to our questions. There's all sorts of wiggle room and negotiation in that process, and it goes on virtually every day that Congress is in session. So, but some Democratic staffers in this case have gotten hold of the fact that Donald Trump Jr. and Attorney General Sessions were either removed from or had their testimony, their subpoena stopped or not acted on, and they're trying to make it sound like it's some grand conspiracy. It's not. The Attorney General obviously is restricted on what he can or cannot testify about on two fronts. Number one, he's recused himself from all things pertaining to Russia and that Mueller special counsel investigation. And two, he has to be very careful about what he says because his position is in some way tied to or linked to various presidential privileges. And so he can't speculate, he can't go off on different topics. And since he's already recused himself, there really isn't very much value necessarily in interviewing him specifically on these Russian collusion claims. And with respect to Donald Trump Jr., I think he's been before both the House and the Senate before that, and he's testified, I believe, to Special Counsel Mueller. So that too is sort of a dead end. But when the staffers get a hold of it and they start a whispering campaign to the Washington Post and others, that all of a sudden seems like it's a big deal. It's not. So that is sort of a perspective that I hope you'll consider with respect to this House Intelligence Committee Russia investigation. Mr. Nunes deciding not to pursue a couple of subpoenas. It's not a big deal, and it's pretty routine. And certainly the criminal probe that's being conducted by Special Counsel Mueller is still running along doing whatever it's doing. So it's just a very interesting time to watch political maneuvering on Capitol Hill. It's also an interesting time to look at what isn't being talked about. And I mentioned earlier, there's no further discussion of unmasking. And that whole unmasking issue is why Mr. Nunes originally had to recuse himself from the activities of the committee, because people filed an ethics complaint against him in his conduct or comments with people in the White House about unmasking. That was enough to knock Nunes out of operating for a couple of months. And when similar complaints were filed against Democratic members for unlawful disclosures, guess what happened? Well, the House ethics people decided that there was no reason that they should recuse themselves, and they canned that investigation. So, again, this is sort of the disparate, unequal treatment between the political operatives on the Hill. It's pretty much standard fare, but I think that you needed to understand a little bit more of the backstory, because if you just read the headlines or the couple of bullet points that you would see on a television screen, you may not necessarily appreciate all the sort of inner workings, sort of the, unfortunately, the sausage factory aspect of how this stuff plays out. So hopefully you now have a better insight. You understand that it isn't necessarily the deal that they try to play it up to be. You've got a couple of questions I hope posed, or that you're wondering about. Might be a good time to ask your congressman, hey, whatever happened to unmasking? What's being done there? I think that's a pretty important question. There's been a lot of reporting in the last day or so with respect to Steve Bannon, the president's former strategist on the campaign. Evidently, he's doing a book with an author in the UK. There's some pretty outrageous language in that. The president came back today with a statement countering some of the things that are reported in the book. This is like the old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. That's true. We have a lot of stuff going on. Judicial Watch will continue to pursue the things we've been pursuing, all of our investigative activity, all of our litigation. So rest assured, we'll stay on top of that. And hopefully I'll be back next week to give you another little inside scoop or behind the scenes update, not just on our work here at Judicial Watch, but also what's happening with all the other political creatures out there in the swamp. So thanks for joining us. I'm Chris Farrell on Watch.